Three messages before we get started. First, are you still using a web font from the 90s? In my interview with Pamela Wilson of BigBrandSystem.com, she said there are two critical parts to a blogger's brand: colors, and you guessed it, fonts. You see how easy it is to read the font at Big Brand System? Well, Pamela did that with Typekit.com, a website that allows you to use custom fonts on your blog. And hey, I use it for writer views too. It literally took me 5 minutes to get set up, and best of all, it's free. So get started at Typekit.com today. Second, if you're a serious blogger, it's time to consider a premium theme for your blog. But with so many options, how do you know which one is right for you? Well, let's see what the world's top bloggers are using. Ramit Sethi uses Thesis. Neil Patel uses Thesis. You can use Thesis too for just $87, and you'll find it at DIYthemes.com. Finally, have you noticed that little pop-up box at the bottom corner of writer views? It's powered by a company called Kiss Insights, and just after I installed it, I got a question from a viewer saying, could you add an RSS feed widget so I can add you to my blog reader? So now, writer views has got RSS. That's the actionable feedback you're going to get when you use kissinsights.com. Enjoy the program. Hi everybody, I'm Michael Alexis, producer of writerviews.com. Today I'm interviewing Pamela Wilson, who is the blogger and entrepreneur behind BigBrandSystem.com, and I invited Pamela Wilson to Writer Views to demystify a subject that, quite frankly, I don't understand a lot about: branding and marketing. And I hope that everyone watching will be able to at least relate in part to that too, because while we might be writers, there is a lot more to getting our word out than just putting our words online. So, Pamela, welcome to the show.
Hi, Michael. It's so great to be here.
And I definitely appreciate you being here. I was hoping we could start then by introducing branding and marketing to the skeptical viewer, a blogger who has just started watching and is, wondering if they're going to sit here for the next 50 minutes, an hour, and learn a lot, learn something of value to them. So why does branding and marketing matter for bloggers?
I think it matters tremendously. I mean, partly because there are just so many blogs out there. So branding your blog from the very beginning is a great way to distinguish what you offer and to make yourself sort of stand out from the pack, because the pack gets bigger every single day. So, and just to clarify, I see branding and marketing as two very different things. I see them kind of like getting ready to go out on a date. So branding is what you do when you're in your own home, you're picking out what you're going to wear, you're getting yourself all ready, you're thinking about what you're going to say to your date, you're thinking about the things you're going to be doing together that evening, the activities you have planned. And then marketing is actually the date itself. So marketing is where you take all that branding work and actually put it to use. And I think it's important to understand that difference and to think of branding as kind of an internal process that you do, and then marketing as the external, putting into practice that branding that you've done internally.
I like the date analogy. I think it makes it accessible for all of us, this idea of, again, branding and marketing. So maybe we can talk about the two separate at first and then join them together towards the end of the conversation. With branding then, how do we go about getting started? You can imagine that somebody's opened up their WordPress blog and they're using 2011 theme, and they've started writing and they've got some friends on commenting, and they're wondering, how do I create my brand? How do I decide what my brand is even going to be?
Right. Well, the first thing they can do is get away from 2011 theme. Just for people who aren't familiar, 2011 theme is the WordPress default theme. And so of all the themes that are out there, 2011, you see quite a lot. And it's basically someone who has made zero effort to do any kind of branding. So I would definitely recommend that as a first step. Get away from that theme. I recommend picking a premium theme, and I happen to really like the ones that give you design controls, because they give you the opportunity to really put a stamp on your blog that's unique, and they give you, if you're not a coder, which a lot of bloggers aren't, they give you a way to get into the controls that will allow you to have a certain background, sometimes a certain width, and use specific fonts and things like that. So that's definitely something to think about, is getting a theme that you can manipulate a little bit. I recommend that.
That's something I've heard from several bloggers that I've interviewed, and it's also something I've read all over the internet, right? They say, don't just use even a fancy free theme. Go ahead and invest in something premium. What kind of investment are we talking about? Do we need to spend $50, a couple of $100, $1,000 to be able to get ourselves into brandable mode online?
Well, that's the thing. It doesn't cost that much. I mean, when you compare what websites used to cost to put together, and it was, usually four figures and up. So $1,000, $3,000, $7,000, $10,000, and up from there. And these were websites that you had very little control over. If you needed a change made to them, you had to go back to the developer and ask that developer to make the change. So when you compare it with that, the cost of a premium theme seems like a drop in the bucket. It's almost nothing. So we're talking about usually $100 or less to get a theme that's a premium theme that has design controls that you can go in and manipulate and change whenever you want. I mean, you can basically change the look of your site from one day to the next.
Is there a particular premium theme that you recommend?
I really love Prose from Studio Press. It's the one I use on my own blog. I have it on almost every site that I have. And as a matter of fact, I'm actually building a product right now around that theme, because I think it is the best way for someone who doesn't have those coding skills to have a site that's unique and that's very easy to maintain. So I'm putting together this product called Site Setup Kit, and that's basically the idea behind the product, is that you can take this theme and create any kind of site look and have a site that you'll be able to maintain over time all by yourself. And it won't be confusing because it's based on WordPress, and as you know, WordPress is a lot like a word processor. So if you can handle a word processor, you can handle WordPress.
Right. So what I'm wondering then is, somebody's made the investment, they've spent $100 to get this premium theme, and they've got design controls. How do they go about manipulating those controls to create a brand?
Right. Well, that's the thing. It's sort of like you get this new car and it has all these switches and you don't know which one to push and what it's going to do exactly. So it can be a little bit confusing when you have all of those design controls to understand what's going to do what and how to get the look that you want. But basically, what I tell people to start out with is colors and fonts. Colors first, because colors are, in my opinion, they're the cheapest way to convey your brand visually. I mean, we're talking about the visual brand here, and not your sort of verbal brand. But when it comes to your visual brand, colors do a fantastic job. And on the web, they're free. I have a lot of experience in the design world, and a lot of my experience comes from print. And in print, every time you add a color to a piece of paper, it costs you more. On the web, it's totally free. So I highly recommend that people inject a little color into their sites as a first step. And that color can be very subtle. If they don't want to step too far away from white, it can be a very subtle color. But a little bit of color, adding it around your content area in particular, will help to make it easier to read and just kind of hold that content in one place. And it gives a little bit more of the impression that you're reading a book or reading on a device because you have an edge. So I highly recommend some kind of background color, even if it's subtle. And then also fonts. Fonts are very important. Now, fonts used to be this huge mystery. I mean, for a long time, we basically had this group of, 12 standard web fonts. Georgia, Times Roman, Arial, Verdana, all of these standard fonts. And it was very boring because everybody's sites used one of these standard fonts. Nowadays, though, the font warehouse has been, the doors have been blown wide open basically, and you can choose fonts to use on your site to really give it a custom look. And again, it's a little bit like, I'm a kid in the candy store and I don't know what to pick first. So sometimes people go overboard and they apply all of these different fonts all over their site, and it starts to look a little bit of like a mishmash. So again, I recommend keeping it to a minimum, choosing maybe 2 fonts. You can use one for your headlines and your subheads, and then another for your text area. And that helps to make like a cohesive site that's still custom. So those are the first 2 places I would start.
Let's dig a little bit deeper into those then. When the viewer goes to bigbrandsystem.com, they'll notice that you use big bold colors on the site. There's the dark red background and even the logo, the really vibrant red and blues. Why?
Well, it's all about what brand message you're trying to convey. So in the case of my site, the message that I want to convey is, you might have a small business, you might have a small blog, but you don't have to look small. And making these design decisions, very simple ones, because if you look at my logo, it's really just a type logo. It's nothing fancy. If you make these design decisions and make them carefully, you can make your brand look a lot bigger than it may be, than it really is. I mean, Big Brand System is me. I have an assistant, but it's basically a very, very small business. But when you go to the site, you don't necessarily get that impression. It might look a little bit bigger than it is. So that's the message I'm trying to get across to everyone else. And I purposely keep my site very simple because I want it to look like something that anyone could do.
Right. I like that. And I want to... Where do I take this? I want to talk more about colors. I want to talk more about fonts. But I know you've got my mind to this idea of making yourself look bigger than you are, because I think that could be something potentially very useful for a beginner, even intermediate blogger who hasn't reached notoriety yet. So what are the things that a beginner blogger can do to look like they're a bigger brand, look like they're a more popular site?
Well, first of all, I have to say that if you're a beginner blogger and you're thinking about these things, you have such an advantage, because there's an element to this that's kind of this invisible element that people don't talk about. But when you're talking about branding and marketing and making those things work for your blog and work for your business, the invisible element is time. So if you start thinking about these things at the very beginning, before you've really got the audience and before you've really put yourself out there, and you establish some kind of verbal and visual brand, and we should talk about the verbal brand because that's just as important as the visual, but if you establish these things from the very beginning, and then you have the element of time working for you, so in other words, every time you put yourself out there, you're conveying the same brand, the same messaging over and over again. Well, over time, people start to remember that, and you get some recognition because you've been very consistent about conveying that messaging. So awesome if they're beginning bloggers and they're thinking about branding, because that's the best time to do it, is at the very beginning.
Right. You mentioned verbal branding. Let's continue on with that. What exactly is verbal branding?
Well, verbal branding, the thing is, people think about branding and they always think design, which, I mean, I have a special place in my heart for design, obviously, but branding is not just design. It's also that messaging that you use to reach your target market. So the target market piece of it is very important. When you are writing a blog or starting a business, you always have to think about who you're trying to reach. And if you have a very clear vision of who is going to be helped by your offering, whether it's simply your writing at first, or if it's a product or a service that you want to offer, if you have a very clear vision of who that person is, then all of your branding messaging, like your business name, your tagline, the way you talk about your business, the way you talk about the benefits of what you offer, All of those things are going to be targeted toward that particular group, and they're going to make sense to that group. They're going to be, you'll use words that they can relate to. You'll use maybe some of the same words that they use to describe their challenges in your branding. So that verbal piece of branding is very, very important. And when you have it working in conjunction with your visual branding, it's super powerful.
How do we know who that target is? How do we know who the person is that we're speaking to?
Well, I think you start by imagining, first of all, who could most be helped by what it is that you plan to offer. So let's look at your business. You are trying to appeal to writers and bloggers as well, correct?
Correct. With a
Right.
focus on bloggers
So,
right now.
okay. So, but what you want to do is think about the kind of person who's most going to be helped by what you have on your blog, and imagine that person in a very detailed way. I mean, you really want to imagine what gender they might be. Now, everyone wants to say, oh, well, I want to appeal to both genders, and I want to appeal to all age groups, and I want to appeal to, but it doesn't really work that way. I mean, effective branding makes some choices about who you most want to target. And the idea is if you do it right, when those people who you want to target come to your site, what goes through their head is like, oh, I'm in the right place because this site is for me. I can tell. I can tell by what they say. I can tell by the colors they're using. I can tell by the tone, the visual style. Everything is speaking to me. You want them to sort of recognize themselves in your site. And to do that, you have to make some very deliberate decisions about the way you speak about your offerings, about the way you present, the kind of tagline you have, for example, the way you present your business visually.
Right, so Right of Use then isn't just for writers, it isn't just for bloggers, but for a very specific kind and maybe even gender of blogger as well.
Right, right. And that
Something to
kind
put
of
my mind
thinking,
to.
you know, sorry?
Something to put my mind to, something to think about.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the thing is, if you do that kind of thinking at the beginning, um, you'll target a certain group. Now, you may find as you go along that a completely different group that you didn't expect is attracted to your blog. I coached someone at one point who was trying to appeal to people in like the 25 to 35 age group, and she found that for whatever reason, her writing was attracting retirees. So, what can you do? You just, if you have to, you adapt and you say, okay, well, I didn't attract the group that I wanted, but I attracted this other group. So let me think about what their issues are, what their problems are, and how I can help them and what I can offer to them. A great way to do this is once you've been going for a little while to run some kind of customer survey. And, it doesn't have to be long, 2 or 3 questions, but ask for some basic information. Ask them to give you feedback on what they found most helpful. And do this every so often. I mean, maybe once a year. Ask some of those basic questions so you can find out who's actually reading.
Right. Sounds very useful, and find out a little bit about the demographics. It sounds like. Then, okay, so we have decided, at least in our minds, that we want to appeal to a specific kind of person, and we want to start writing and designing our blog to do that, but we don't exactly know how. Are there examples of bloggers online who do this really well that maybe we could model ourselves after?
Well, I knew you were going to ask me this question, so I made a list. I'm going to have to consult it over here. I have it. Let me see where I have. Okay, yeah, I have it over here. I kind of stuck it up so I'd be prepared. The list starts with kissmetrics.com. They are trying to appeal to people who are trying to get the best conversions on their website, basically. It's a very clean looking blog One thing that I like that they do, which is very interesting and kind of unique, is they have this sidebar that as you scroll down and read their posts, the sidebar kind of travels along with you. I haven't seen that on another site. So that's something different, that you can take a look at and see if you're interested in. There's another site called webislove.com. This is actually written by someone in Tuscany in Italy. It's a very simple site. It's got beautiful white space. Actually, the site has kind of a cream colored background, but it's a beautiful use of white space. That person is trying to appeal to people who are into design. So when you see the site, you can see that. They don't update very often, but the site itself is aesthetically just gorgeous. So another site I really like, and this is a good site to model if you happen to have a blog that runs a lot of ads. Some people use this as a business model. They run ads on their site, but it's always a problem because the ads end up kind of competing with the content visually. It's like you don't really know where to look. You've got the content, you've got these blinking, flashing, colorful ads. So this site, freelanceswitch.com, does a fantastic job of running a fair amount of ads in their sidebar. But what they do is they take the background color of their site and they continue it down the sidebar. And then the content area has a white background. So the content area really comes forward visually and the ads tend to kind of recede. And that helps a lot. I mean, you don't feel that competition when you get to that site, even though there's quite a lot going on the site. Another site I like, and I'm completely biased because I'm one of their writers, is copyblogger.com. Copyblogger.com just did something kind of radical. They took their blog off their homepage. And this is a site that is known to be about blogging. I mean, they've got blog in the name, but they don't have their blog as their homepage anymore because a lot of what they offer is software solutions for people who use WordPress. They have a lot of, they're trying to position themselves as more of a software company. So the blog has, I wouldn't say taken a back seat, but they've made it a little bit less prominent than it was. And that's a fairly radical approach for that site. I think they're still testing it and deciding whether or not it works. But I like their design. It's very clean and easy to read. And their site is about writing. So being easy to read is important.
It's something interesting that I'd actually like to ask a little bit more about because I haven't been to Copyblogger in the last couple of days. I didn't know that. But I did notice that other bloggers have started doing the same. Neil Patel with QuickSprout. The front page is his traffic generation system product. Even Ramit Sethi in the last couple of months has changed his as well so that it's not the blog on the first page. It's, hey, this is who I am and these are the media sources that I've been on and etc. that seem a lot more focused on personal branding than the written content of the site. What kind of an impact does that change have on a brand? Because especially for Copyblogger, it seems like a pretty big switch.
It's a big switch, but I think that the idea behind that switch is that these days, the way most people find these posts on a blog is through social media. So you see a link on Google+, you see somebody comment on it on Facebook, somebody tweets it. And what happens is when they tweet a post, they tweet the link to that specific page that the post is on. So you sort of dive directly into the site and get right into the post. You're not really going to the site through the home page. You tend to go in directly to these blog pages. So I think the idea is we're going to use our home page to promote our business. And our blog pages, people will find the direct route to those through social media. Or through links on other websites. They'll go directly to those posts. It's a big gamble, and I think a lot of people are trying it now, and they're testing to see if it's actually going to work, which is always a good idea when you make a big change like that. But I think potentially it could pay off for them. For a lot of these companies, it's a natural progression from being a blog-based business to being a business that has a blog. And it's a different way of thinking about it, but it's a natural progression to express that with the way your site is structured by putting the blog kind of a little more to the background and putting your business more to the forefront.
Now, do you think this is something that ought to be done once you are already established? You know, the blogs that we're talking about, Copy Blogger, Quick Sprout, Ramit's I Will Teach You to Be Rich, they're all top 10,000 in Alexa, right? They get a lot of traffic. Do you have to wait until you're a great big popular blog before you focus the attention on the business, on the products, on what you're selling instead of what you're writing?
Right. I think it has to be a business decision. It has to be a strategic business decision, just like anything else. So it's not so much a matter of popularity. It's more, what is going to help our business. If people come to my business, it's sort of like imagine that your website is a storefront. So people walk in, and do you send them directly into this small room that has a very specific offering of yours, or do you kind of bring them into this atrium where they can see everything you have to offer and then they can choose where they want to go? Well, a lot of these people, once they have a lot of things to show, they want to bring people into the atrium, basically. They want to show them the big room with everything they have to offer, and that way the visitor can sort of choose which one they pursue. So it's partly a result of being big, but it's because their businesses have grown to the point that they have a lot to talk about. And just sending them straight to the blog isn't really doing it justice.
It's interesting. It actually reminds me that when I first started Write Reviews, writereviews.com was a very simple page that just introduced what the site was about, and then there was an email sign-up form. The interviews were on /blog or something after the .com, and that email sign-up form converted very, very well. So again, this idea that what you present up front can certainly be of value. You mentioned KISS metrics as well, and I'm actually going to be interviewing Neil Patel in a couple of days, so maybe I can ask him all about it. But I'd like to get your opinion on some of the other things they do. You said, as you scroll down the blog, the sidebar does something which is the only time you've ever seen it. There's also another thing they do I really like is they have, they'll put a sentence, they'll put a quote with the link to tweet it right next to it. Instead of just tweet the whole article, it's, hey, tweet this part that's kind of cool. All of these unique little things they do, how does that contribute to the brand? How does that make them KISS metrics instead of the other guys?
I think one of the things that Neil is doing is trying a lot of innovative things, and I'm sure that that's part of his brand as well, that he's trying to sort of set the standard and maybe be the first to try some of these things, so that he's considered an authority figure and a leader in the marketplace. So I definitely ask him when you talk to him, and I'll be curious to see what he says as well. I'm sure because of his company, he's testing all of these things. And if things aren't working, he's probably yanking them and then trying something else. So I think a lot of people look at KISS metrics and say, well, what are they doing? And maybe I'll try it, because they just assume that if something is on that site, it's been tested and proven to work.
Right. You touched on something there that I think is really going to be worth our time to go into, which is personal branding. Is there a difference between the branding on our blog and the brand? Let's say we're a solo blogger writing. Is there a difference between the brand of our blog and our personal brand?
Yeah, I actually don't do a whole lot around personal branding. I'm more about helping people brand their businesses. So now there are times when someone's business is them. In the case of a writer or maybe a coach, their business is really them, and so their brand is very linked with them and their personalities, and on getting helping people to get to know them as people and all of that. But I see a big difference. I mean, a business brand is more about what can this business do for the audience that it's trying to serve. And a personal brand is more about how can I relate to this person so that I want to do business with them. Does that
Right.
make sense?
Certainly, I see the distinction, and I can see how they could be different. Let's let's continue this interview on your expertise then, which is branding a business. And we started the conversation talking about some of the things that we can do ourselves. Investing in the premium theme and starting to design. What about when we're ready to go the step further? When we want something really unique, something that's really going to stand out. Is that a time to go about finding and working with a designer?
You can. I mean, honestly, you can work with a designer from the very beginning. If you have the funds to do that, that's fantastic. It can be a little bit challenging to find the right person and to get the communication going and feel like they're listening to what you're asking for and responding and all of that. I mean, all of that can be a little bit challenging, but if you have the funds to do that, that's a good use of funds. And when it comes to a blog, since your audience is primarily bloggers, actually the best place that you can invest funds, if you have limited funds and you want to invest it in one place, it would be in your header and in your header art. Because that header art across the top that says your blog name and hopefully expresses your tagline can be recycled and reused for a lot of different things. You can resize it and use it as the header for any email marketing you might do, which is typically 600 pixels wide. So you just basically take your header art and size it to fit. And then you can also use that same image in like an email signature. You can reduce it down and use it as like an image signature to emails that you send. Personal emails that you send. So it's kind of an all-purpose image, and it's a great place to invest funds.
Into the header. Now, how do we go about finding a designer that we can work well with?
Well, it's almost, I think this is what people say for everything, but ask your friends first. That's the first place to start. And the other thing is, if you see a site and you admire their header artwork, contact the blog owner. I mean, they're usually very happy to pass along a name. So, it's kind of like when you're looking for someone to cut your hair, when you see, well, I don't know, maybe not guys, okay? But this is what women do. When we see somebody that has a haircut that we like, we say, where do you get your haircut? So it's kind of the same thing.
Right, I'll add that my strategy for getting haircuts in China is to find the busiest hair salon that I can, because I figure they've got to be doing something right.
Oh yeah, no, and that's a great, I mean, if you have a designer, if you see a designer who's very busy and sometimes they may say to you, I can do this, but I can't get to it until, 6 weeks from now. That is usually a pretty good sign.
Right, and perhaps worth waiting for.
Mm-hmm.
What does a designer cost? I mean, there must be a huge range, but
There's a huge range. There's a huge range. Are we talking about blog headers still?
um, blog headers, and then also an entire blog. A theme a custom theme, something that's going to stand out from top to bottom.
Right. Well, I'll go back to what I said originally. I mean, that could be anywhere from 300 to 3,000 to 4,000. I mean, it just kind of depends on what you need for the theme, how involved it's going to be, how much customization they need to do. They may start with a theme and then just customize certain elements of it, and it's fairly straightforward. But then if you need some, special coding done or some really unique things done to it, then it's going to cost a little bit more. But I hate to give those answers because I know they're not helpful, but the most accurate answer I can give you is it depends. And that's why you have to go into it with a really good, really tight description of what you're looking for, and then present that exact same description to everyone that you talk to. And in the end, you'll have, some estimates where you're kind of comparing apples to apples, and you can look at pricing and make a decision.
Right. Let's really try to revert this back to where we started then, because if we're going to have to communicate this to a designer, it sounds like we have to have a pretty clear idea of exactly what we want in our design. So we had talked about colors. Are there certain colors that are particularly good for branding?
No, I mean, there's not certain colors. No, it's not
Are
like
there
that.
ones we should stay away from?
Well, I guess when it comes to a blog or a website, the only colors I tell people to really avoid if they want their site to be read, which is most people want their site to be read, I tell people to stay away from fluorescents because fluorescents are very jarring. They're hard to look at. So it's best to use colors that are a little bit easier on the eyes than fluorescent. So that would be the only thing to avoid. But besides that, the color choice really goes down to what is going to speak to the target market you're trying to reach. What colors are going to make sense to them and relate to the topic you talk about. So that probably still is not specific enough for you because it's not usually for most people. But what I tell people is look at the things that that target audience already interacts with, maybe the consumer products that they tend to be attracted to. Go out shopping and put yourself in your target market's shoes and imagine the kinds of things that they're attracted to and the kinds of things that they're already buying. And look at the colors used in those things to see if you can get some inspiration for your website. That's one way to do it. The other way is to simply start with 2 colors that you choose and, do your best to choose some that will speak to your market and use that reduced palette so that you're not going too crazy trying to pick a whole bunch of colors.
Right. I'm a little bit curious about this idea of research. And so, we're bloggers and we want to know what appeals to our target markets. So we look at similar blogs to ours. Maybe it's a similar theme concept. If we borrow, too many of those colors, too many of the design elements, do we risk, looking a little bit too much like that other blog and not having a distinct brand of our own?
Definitely. I mean, there's always a chance of that, and I really recommend that you can look at other blogs for inspiration, but you need to create your own unique brand because you see it out there. You see these kind of copycat websites that you land on them, and you're like, wait a minute, where am I? Because this looks exactly like this other website, but it's not. So what's that about? So the first message that sends is, I am not an original thinker. And that's not a good first message when you're landing on a website. So you need to really put your own stamp on things. And it does take some effort, but I recommend that people make that effort from the very beginning and find something that will work for their particular brand so that they're not considered a copycat website, because people are going to have a really hard time believing that they'll find unique content on a site that looks visually exactly like another site.
Right. I feel like this is a good interview to name drop in because by doing so we can offer a lot of examples to the viewers. So as you were talking, there's other blogs going through my mind that I think brand themselves very well. Chris Gillibo. .com being one with its /3x5 to get to the blog, but I'm sure everyone can find it. Really, really unique special theme. Nerdfitness.com if you're familiar with it. Steve Cam's site is another one that I want to ask about in a second. And then also thinktraffic.net, which is actually how I originally found you, Pamela. He was given away via sign-up form one of your an offering that talks a little bit about branding, color, and fonts, etc. Steve Campsite, though, Nerd Fitness. Right at the top, as soon as you come to the site, you see Steve. How does that affect the brand of a blog?
In the case of Steve's blog, it's a lot about the reader's relationship with him. So there are definitely places where that's completely appropriate, where the blog owner and the principal writer for the blog is the first face that you see when you get there. I think that's a great way to do things if that works with it all comes back to your business message, I mean, the thing about, I think a lot of people think that these design decisions are all based on like what looks good, but it's not really about that. They're really business decisions, and you need to make sure that your visual and your verbal branding is reflecting those business decisions. So you can't just look at his and say, well, is that a good idea? Well, it's probably a good idea for him, but it might not be for everybody, right? So you have to go back and think, okay, what is going to work for my particular business model and for my particular target market? I wish it was easy and you could just say, oh, yeah, I'll do it like this person, but it doesn't usually work that well when you do it that way. It's better to think it through.
Right, and to find our own way, because uniqueness, it sounds like, is a good way to go about branding ourselves. Let's go a little bit further on the track of design. I want to go back to fonts. What is the font that you use on Big Brand System?
I use a font. I use typekit.com, which is a service that will basically serve up custom fonts to your website. So I use a font called Chaparral Pro.
Okay, and it is quite distinct. Why did you choose that font?
And by the way, that's the font I use for the body text, not for the headlines. The headline font is League Gothic. It's a condensed sans serif. I chose that because I think it's very readable. And of course, fonts are always about readability. So, it's important to find a font that will be easy for people to interact with and easy for people to read big blocks of text in. So that's why I chose Chaparral, and it's readable and it has some personality. So I like it for that as well.
Right. Certainly readable seems like a very important one for us bloggers. So Pamela, another thing that I've been wondering about is you do seem to be in a few different places on the web. One, I mentioned that I found you via Think Traffic. You mentioned that you are a writer for Copy Blogger. Why did you choose those blogs to write for? And are there others that I don't know about?
Oh yeah, there are lots of. I'm promiscuous with my guest posting. Actually, it's so many. I'm sure if I try to list them, I'm going to forget half of them. But if you go to Big Brand System in my sidebar, there's a listing of other places that you can find my guest posts around the web. So yeah, part of my business model is obviously to get my message out there to a variety of audiences, and I'm trying to reach people who are receptive to what I have to offer. So I'm looking for people who would like to bootstrap their marketing a little bit and do some things on their own. And my whole message is that we are sitting in front of these very powerful computers that have the ability to do a lot of your business marketing and a lot of your website work. But despite the fact that the tools do that, people don't have the knowledge to use them in a way that helps them to look professional and look polished. So my whole thing is I'm going to bring you my 25 years of experience and teach you how to use the machine that you have in front of you to really promote your business and make you look professional. So I have Site Setup Kit, which I mentioned, which is going to be launching at the beginning of next year. I have a Big Brand System course, which is like a membership site that people can join. They can learn about marketing and design, and that includes a forum and Q&A calls, and I review people's websites, and so that's a whole course basically that people can sign up for. And then last year, I don't know if you saw it, I launched a product with Kelly Kingman called Ebook Evolution, and that is a whole kit for people who want to sell ebooks or offer white papers or special reports on their websites. What Kelly and I found is she and I come at it from slightly different angles. So she writes for the New York Times. I mean, she has a lot of experience as a writer. So she offered a piece of the product that helps people to actually write the ebook. And then she also offered a launch guide that shows them how to launch it and get it out there and market it and all of that. And then I offered templates that are created using open source software, which is free. And people can take this open source software and create the ebook themselves. And the beauty of that is that they can edit it themselves. They have it sitting right in their desktop. So anytime there's a change, they just make the change and create a new PDF, upload it to their websites, and they're all set. So my whole thing is, giving people tools and guidance so that they can do things themselves. So what I try to do is pick blogs that have some of those people in their audiences, people who are, for whatever reason, sometimes they're bootstrapping for reasons of finances. They're trying to keep their costs down. Sometimes they just like it. They like to do creative work, or they like to have the control of handling that work themselves so that when changes have to get made, they can just make them. They don't have to wait for a vendor to do the change for them. So I'm really trying to find those people, and all of my guest posts are about that. They're trying to reach out to those people, and obviously you're trying to establish yourself as an authority and someone who knows about these topics and all of that.
Do the products and services you offer affect your brand?
Well, they're all built around my brand, actually. I mean, I think you have to think about what you're offering and make sure that it sends a cohesive message with your brand. And so I've tried to be really careful about choosing things that kind of follow that same theme of basically empowering people to do this stuff themselves. If I come across something that isn't really following that theme, I don't usually pursue it. I only pursue things that kind of support that message.
Right. And what about when it comes time to pricing products? What impact does that have on your brand? Or maybe a more interesting question is, how can you use branding to create, or how can you use pricing to create a brand, to influence your brand?
It's funny because I think I've always thought of that question from the opposite angle. It's more, to me, it's more like, how can you use your branding to influence pricing? So, it's, I'm sure that there's a way to think about pricing as influencing your brand as well. I suppose they're kind of, they work hand in hand to a certain extent, but the way I tend to think about it is, you have a brand that is professional, it's authoritative, it's trustworthy. You do things on a certain schedule and you stick to that schedule and you deliver week after week, and people start to trust you and see you as someone that they'd be willing to do business with, basically. And that helps you when you go to sell a product, because people trust you and they believe that you'll do what you promise. So all of that branding work is kind of like, the base that you stand on when you go to put a product out there. And it allows you to charge a little bit more, I think, if you've done it right, because people see you as kind of a high quality vendor.
Do you think there's a risk in overpricing or underpricing a product?
There's always that risk. I mean, there is always that risk. I think you have to test. That's where testing comes in. You have to check to see what works with your market. You put a price out there. If it doesn't work, you can make adjustments, But there's always that risk. Pricing is it's a little bit art, and it's a little bit science, and it's a little bit guesswork, and it's hard to know exactly until you get it out there. The market always speaks, though. So if you listen.
Right, and perhaps that the testing that we've mentioned now in pricing is something that we could apply to the design too, especially in the beginning when we're doing it ourselves and manipulating the controls in the premium theme. Try something for a couple weeks, try something else for a couple weeks, and see what resonates with people. I think it might be useful. Maybe in the last few minutes of our interview, I would like to talk about a little bit more about Right of Use. Before we actually started recording, Pamela and I were talking about making hour-long interviews and posting frequency and these kinds of things. How am I going to articulate this question well? Does it make a big difference for your brand whether you post one time a week, an hour-long video, 5 times a week, 20-minute long videos? Are you targeting a different person? Are you appealing to different people?
I mean, I think you potentially are. So, one of the things that we talked about before we started filming was the length of your interviews. And I think, potentially you have to think about who would have time to devote to an hour-long interview. And that person might be slightly different than someone who gets antsy after 3 minutes, right? So, you'll have to think about who those people are. As far as posting frequency, I do think that it's very important to pick a frequency that you can maintain, that you can maintain, and then to be very consistent about that. And that might be twice a month. I mean, for some people it's twice a month. And if that's what you can maintain and that's what you can do consistently, then that's what you should do. It's hard to say. I don't think there's a magic number. I mean, I think most people try to hit at least once a week. Um, once you get down to like once a month, it seems like more like an occasional newsletter or something that comes out, and not necessarily so much of a publication. So I think it needs to be at least a couple times a month. Some people post 5 days a week. I don't know how they do it, but some people post 5 days a week. So it depends on what works for you and what your market seems to respond to.
Right. The first interview I did was with Trent Ham of thesimpledollar.com, and I remembered looking at his archives, and I think it was, yeah, every day of the week, twice a day, which is a whole lot of writing. But
Wow.
he's
Yeah.
built up a lot of traffic, and a lot of people keep coming back for it. So the motivation is there to continue.
I think probably the biggest piece, Michael, is you have to think about quality more than quantity, right? So you have to make sure that you find a posting schedule that will allow you to post high quality posts on a regular basis. So I know I can't post twice a day, 5 days a week, and keep my posts high quality. I just can't. They take me a long time to write, and I would rather have something very well done and polished and post less often than something that is just, I just put something out there because it's the afternoon and I got to get my post out kind of a thing. So I think it's about quality as much as quantity, and then being consistent, like I said.
Right, and how that quality will contribute to our brand. Maybe one final question then before we finish up, which is, as I so often ask in these interviews, a piece of advice for somebody watching. Somebody is thinking, okay, I'm inspired. We've heard all this about colors and fonts and a little bit of personal branding and all the things that I can do for my site. Well, what's one thing they can do this afternoon to get started?
Honestly, the best use of their time is probably to spend some time really, really thinking about who they're trying to appeal to, and to get the idea out of their heads that they're writing for the whole entire internet, and decide who can most be served by the information that they offer and the products or services that they offer, and think really hard about that person. I mean, a lot of people recommend that you actually have a name for that person and an image of that person, and you think about what their home lives are like and what kind of car they might drive, and all of these little details. I do think that work is very valuable, because everything that happens with branding and marketing happens after that, after you've done that work, thinking through about your target market. So I highly recommend that people think about that, and that they kind of base all of their decisions off of the thinking that they do around that.
Right, it sounds like very useful advice, and when we do disconnect this call, it's something I'm going to spend some time thinking about, because while the ambitious part of me, maybe like so many people, does want to appeal to everybody on the planet, it sounds like the real way to go with branding is to have that target person in mind.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, Pamela, thanks so much for doing this interview. As I said in the introduction, it's not a subject that I knew a lot about, but I hope that the viewers got as much as I did about creating a brand and are inspired to learn more.
Thank you, Michael. It was great to speak with you.
Talk to you again soon. Take care.
Bye bye. Take care, everybody.
Goodbye.